Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Association of Pacific Rim Universities APRU Multi-Hazards Virtual Summer School Part 2. I assume some of you already participated in the first session last week. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you again to this virtual summer school. This is organized by the APRU Multi-Hazards Program and the International Research Institute of Disaster Science, APRU-IRIDeS Tohoku University in Japan. I'm Tohoku Izumi, Associate Professor of Tohoku University and Program Director of the APRU Multi-Hazards Program. Also, I'm a moderator of today's session. The Multi-Hazards Program was established in 2013, and its secretariat is hosted by Tohoku University in Japan. The program has been working to strengthen the collaborative researches on disaster science among the APRU member universities and contribute to international and regional discussions for DR policy making through various channels and platforms. The activities include the summer school, the annual research symposium, and the campus safety program, and others. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, the summer school this year is virtual, but I hope I can meet you at Tohoku University next year. The regular summer school includes the one-day field visit to the affected site by Great East Japan Earthquake and Tsunami, and in addition to 3-day lectures and group works. This webinar series comprised 3 separate sessions. The first one was organized last week, and you can access to the video that recorded the session on YouTube. The topic of today's session is role of various stakeholders in disaster risk reduction. And we have 5 speakers today. And the first speaker is Professor Fumihiko Imamura from the International Research Institute of Disaster Science in Tohoku University, and Ms. Christina Strandweber from the APRU International Secretariat, and Mr. Takeshi Komino from Church World Service based in Tokyo, and Professor Mikio Ishiwatari from University of Tokyo and JICA, and myself. So while you are listening to the presentations, I would like to encourage you to send us questions using the Q&A function. After each presentation, I will take questions from the audience and ask the speakers to answer the questions. Also, we would like to ask you to share the webinar information and tag at APRU 1997 and hashtag APRU Plus on Facebook and Twitter. So now I would like to introduce and welcome the first speaker, Professor Fumihiko Imamura, Director of APRU-IRIDeS Tohoku University. He specializes in tsunami engineering and natural disaster science and has been conducting numerous studies researches on the development of tsunami warning systems and disaster mitigation measures in the Pacific, aiming to reduce tsunami damage. So thank you, Professor Imamura, joining us today when you are so busy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for my introduction. I am the Fumihiko Imamura, the Director of the APRU-IRIDeS Tohoku University. So thank you very much for joining this virtual summer school. So we are very happy to have the great opportunities. So let's share the slide with you. Okay. Can you see the slide? Okay, so this summer school organized by the APRU and APRU-IRIDeS Multi-Hazard Program. It was established in the April 2013 with the APRU-IRIDeS Tohoku University. We are very happy to host its secretary and provided the coordination and administrative services. As you know, 2011 Tohoku earthquake tsunami caused serious damages. So we have the new form to discuss and implement for the disaster risk reduction. So that's why we communicate with the APRU and established a new program for multi-hazard. We have the core group with the 12 members from UC Davis and University of Hawaii and Chile and so on. They are very active, and which is the driving for the decision-make bodies. We have the two objectives. One is to harness the collective capacity of the APRU universities for especially cutting-edge research on disaster risk reduction. We have each properties and expertise. Actually, I am the professor of the tsunami engineering and many members of the natural sciences, but we need the social and the human sciences and the medical. So we need the multiple research group, especially to see the cutting edge areas. And the second is they contribute to the international and regional discussion to make influence in the DRR policy making process. So as you can see, our activities. First one is the campus safety. Second is a summer school like today, and third is the collective survey research with the colleague. The fourth is data sharing and contribution the discussion for the making the process for policies. And we have the another activities, which is the strategies in this program. First one is the new collaboration and expanding network with the APRU members and other international organizations such as UN, United Nations, and others. And the second one is the contribution to the international discussion, as I said. Hosting and participate in international event, big event for discuss the DRR, such as United Nations World Conference on DRR, or we organize the World Bosai Forum every 2 years. It is a good opportunity, I think. And to providing input to the Sendai framework for DRR, which is a very important framework now. And the third one, sharing the knowledge, especially we have the many experiences and lessons learned from the 2011 Tohoku earthquake tsunami. And we organized a summer school, including today, you can have the opportunity to share this. And cross-sectoral discussion on the various topics in disaster sciences, which is a new area for the science, especially to contribute international society. Last one is campus safety for DRR. So we are now doing the many activities for the campus safety. And today we have the virtual summer school due to the COVID-19, but we can expand the abilities to provide the many knowledge and experiences and lessons. So especially Tohoku University in charge to provide you and share the experiences and many lessons at a time. And also to summer school aim to understand latest international disaster science research conducted by the many researchers. They are acting and working globally. So today's topics as the series 2, which is the role of the various stakeholders in disaster risk reduction. Today we have the 3 excellent speakers. As already introduced, Dr. Takako Izumi, our member of the IRIDeS, and Mr. Takeshi Komino, who are expert on the CSO and the NGO. So which title is the emerging trend and role of them in disaster risk reduction. Last speaker is Dr. Mikio Ishiwatari. He is talking about the Japanese experiences and assistance in the flood risk management. So Next slide is the last slide, my talk in the beginning. So most of you and we are living in the ring of fire in the Pacific Rim. We cannot control and avoid such natural disasters, earthquake and volcano, tsunami, flood. But the idea of the build back better after the damage, including the risk management, should include reduce the damages. And we should consider about living together with the harmony of the natures. So thank you very much for your attention. So I hope you have the many learned through the excellent speaker today. Thank you very much.
Program. Thank you very much for your support. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce second speaker, Ms. Christina Schonlever, Senior Director for Policy and Program at APRU. She holds responsibilities for developing and growing APRU's strategic policy impact to address pressing regional challenges through the association's key program areas, working closely with leading scientists and policymakers in the Asia Pacific. So she will introduce the APRU's role and activities. So Christina, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you, Takako. Right, let me share my screen. Right. I'm really pleased to be here today at this 8th Multi-Hazard Summer School. It's a virtual summer school. Normally we would be all together in Sendai, but while I'm very sad about this, I'm very glad in a way that we providing through the virtual summer school the opportunity to many of you to attend this, these 3-day sessions to find out more about disaster risk reduction and about APRU and the multi-hazard program and how it works all together with the Sendai framework. Because many of you may not have the opportunity to travel to Sendai and experience this firsthand. So today I want to provide an overview of APRU, why we were set up and how we aim to support universities in addressing sustainability challenges, which collectively pose arguably the greatest existential challenges mankind faces at the moment. So let me see how I can move, yes, the slides on, here you go. So I think we all know that we are living in a world out of balance. And we know every year we are experiencing increasingly unpredictable blowbacks on our ecosystems, impacting on our communities, businesses, universities, and governments. It's not really certain that we can limit the rise in global temperature to under 2 degrees by the end of the century, but we expect the effects of this to be catastrophic. And I think we all know that we're experiencing some of these already, have been over the last few years anyway. And we also know that, scientifically has been proven that at the end of last year, only 20 fossil fuel companies can be linked to more than 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions in the modern era. These companies knew about their environmental impact from at least the late 1950s. And this was identified by the Climate Accountability Institute in the US. And that means in the past 4 decades, we have done as much damage knowingly to our planet and its ability to sustain human life and civilization as we've ever managed in ignorance prior to this. And while we already have for a long time lived with issues of economic growth, inequality, access to essential resources such as water and food, we also have to face the challenges of predicted population growth to over 9 billion people in the next 30 years. And now, right now, the COVID-19 pandemic, which started out as a health crisis, is also affecting all of us. It's affecting societies and economies around the globe at their core. And while the impact will vary from country to country, it will have a profound yet unpredictable impact going forward. So this is where universities acting together can make a significant difference. And with this slide prior, I just wanted to set the scene to explain why APRU was set up. And we were set up in 1997 already, so way before COVID-19 started. But 4 presidents at that point already had the foresight to understand that universities needed to be at the table to support governments in the Asia-Pacific region to drive this region forward, but also to address challenges that we will all be facing going forward. So I have a quote from one of our founding fathers from 1997, and he said that today's challenges are too complex to solve alone, but acting together, there's almost no limit to what we can accomplish. And this is why APRU was set up by presidents from Caltech, UCLA, Berkeley, and University of Southern California. And they brought together 20 universities in 1997 to support governments and policymakers with insights drawing from research through academic research to drive forward and supporting policymaking and solving issues in the Asia-Pacific region. And you can see in the slide here our strapline. So that was over 20 years ago. We now are more than 50 universities. We have 55 universities in the Asia-Pacific. They're all based around the Ring of Fire, as you just saw from Professor Imamura's presentation, in Southeast Asia and Asia and Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, Mexico, Latin America. And the Secretariat is based in Hong Kong. And if you want to find out more about what we're doing, go to www.apru.org, and I'm sure you can find that website in the chat in any minute, so if you want to find out more. But we're bringing together all of these universities, all of these experts, and how do we then achieve this great mission that we've set out to collectively make a challenge, so to collectively address these challenges in the region. So we've got 3 strategic priorities. How we're aiming to really structure our work. So the aim is to build impact. And we do this by creating high-value partnerships. That's through our membership, through academic networks, through working with students, but also with external partners, really industry, governments, multilateral organizations, and foundations. And by bringing together programs and initiatives. And through doing this, we then also increase APRU values to our members, because without our academic experts and our presidents, university members, we would not be able to do what we're trying to do. And we initiate a lot of programs and activities. But I want to today focus on the programs that are aiming to solve Asia-Pacific challenges specifically. And these challenges, you can see them on the slide here, they all are very big and they all have really a global focus, but we look at it from a regional perspective. And then many of the solutions and many of the projects that we are initiating will then actually have a global impact going forward. So we bring multidisciplinary networks together of academics in these program areas. And we also then set up partnerships with external partners to bring a stakeholder approach into these program areas. So you can see a whole range of these here, but let me I'll focus down on 5 of these, because these 5 that you can see on the slide now have a lead university that help us drive forward these activities. Because the Secretariat in Hong Kong, the APRU Secretariat, would not be able to do any of this on our own. And we have got the longest standing programs here was the Global Health Program, as well as the Multi-Hazards Program, as Professor Imamura so aptly introduced before. And we are glad that we have these member institutions that can work together with us on these. And then, as I mentioned before, we have also external partners that help us to address to bring together programs to initiate projects, to support activities, and will then also help us to disseminate the findings from these programs and projects and activities that we're initiating. So you can see some of these on the slide here, and we work, as said, already with governments, with multilateral organizations, but also with media organizations to reach out to students and to industry partners to help us really bring together networks of academics and develop new insights that will make a difference. But I want today, due to this being the Multi-Hazard Summer School, focus really or use the APRU Multi-Hazard Program as an example and add to what Professor Mamura already explained to you, what the program is doing, and it's set up very well, how it works and what the objectives are. But to go down a level more, what does it actually mean in terms of activity? So the program led by Professor Tohoku Izumi is looking to initiate or is implementing activities that for capacity building. So they set up a new journal together with Elsevier to drive forward really in terms of what disaster risk reduction science can do in addressing the challenges that we're all facing at the moment. We do education. The summer school is a perfect example for this, bringing together normally face-to-face, but now virtually a big group of academics, of students who want to find out more about how this operates and what we can do collectively to combat this challenge that we're all facing. But then we also do smaller scale projects such as the campus safety workshop, and to bring experts from universities together to discuss about campus safeties in the region, which is also now becoming a very, very hot topic. And I'm very glad that Professor Izumi had the foresight several years ago to bring this group together. And then in terms of impact and advocacy, we also do projects. We bring publications together. For example, last year we had the 30 Innovation for Disaster Risk Reduction, second edition, which really was looking at how the work from academia can facilitate the Sustainable Development Goals and push this forward. And you can see some of these pictures here. So the top picture is the summer school last year, which was a physical summer school, and now at the bottom you've got the virtual summer school. And so we act and we operate very quickly going forward. Now, just to let you know what we are doing, just to say, we have changed our working mode considerably, and we are now doing a lot of these activities online. I hope we can go forward again and meet physically, but there is a lot that we can do to collectively that we address these challenges in the region. And so we do a lot of student work. Please find out more about APRU on our website, what the student work that we're doing, the work in higher education, what resources are available. You can find articles and books and webinars, and also the programs. Find out more about the Multi-Hazard Program and any of our other programs too. And with this, this is also our latest annual report. You can download this too. And please, if you've got any questions, you can email us anytime, and we hope to look forward, or we look forward to seeing you, hopefully virtually as well as physically at one of our many events coming forward. Thank you very much. So I am now, it's my great pleasure, to introduce Professor Tohoku Izumi, who's the next speaker. You've already met her, introducing the summer school. And Tohoku is an associate professor at the International Research Institute of Disaster Science, APRU-IRIDeS, at Tohoku University since 2013. She also serves as program director of the Multi-Hazard Program at APRU, and is one of my great colleagues, and I love working with her. Her research interests include international and regional frameworks and strategies for disaster risk reduction, international humanitarian assistance, and DAR initiatives at the local and community levels. Prior to joining academia, Tohoku Izumi has gathered more than 15 years experience as a practitioner in humanitarian assistance, disaster response, recovery, risk reduction, as well as various development issues within an international NGO and UN agencies such as UN Habitat, UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the UN Office for Recovery Coordinator for ACHE and NIAS, and UN International Strategy for Disaster Reduction, which now is UNDRR. And she has been appointed as a member of the UNDRR Asia Pacific Science Technology and Academic Advisory Group since May 2015. And she holds a PhD in Global Environmental Study from Tohoku University, Japan. And we are very lucky to have her as our program director. And Professor Itsumi's talk is towards the implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Christina, for your introduction. But first of all, I should have thank you for your presentation and introducing the APRU for details. And I also am very, very lucky to work with you about the multi-hazard programs. Thank you so much, Christina. So today I'd like to talk about implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, focusing on the roles of stakeholders. So firstly, I will talk about from Hyogo framework for action to Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And before the Sendai framework for DRR is adopted in 2015, there was another international framework called the Hyogo Framework for Action. And it was adopted in 2005 by 168 countries at the UN World Conference on Disaster Reduction held in Kobe, Japan. And there was another UN World Conference on natural disaster reduction in Yokohama in 1994. And the document called the Yokohama Strategy and Plan was adopted at the conference too. However, in this document, the clear priority actions in general were not clearly stated, like HFA and Sendai framework. So it is considered that Yokohama Strategy and Plan increased awareness on DR, and people were encouraged to take actions for DR by HFA, and Sendai framework aimed to achieve the targets. So one of the important significance with HFA was clearly showed 5 priority of actions in DR. So the first priority is to ensure the DR is a national and local priority. And second is to identify, assess, and monitor disaster risks. And third is to use knowledge, innovation, and education for resilient society. And fourth is to reduce underlying risk factors, including climate change, poverty, and urbanizations. And the last one is to strengthen disaster preparedness for effective response. And as a result of HFA, it is considered that awareness and knowledge on DR was further increased, and the importance and understanding of all the stakeholders' involvement was also increased. So in order to develop the new framework, which is the Sendai framework, the progress review of the Hyogo framework was conducted. And there were significant progresses, but on the other hand, it was also found out that many challenges still existed. The data showed that disasters still caused tremendous damage, including high economic loss and casualties. Also, it was highlighted that women, children, and people in vulnerable situations were more affected, and small scale of disasters and slow onset disasters keep affecting communities and small and medium-sized enterprises as well. And reflecting the progress and challenges of the HFA, after 10 years since HFA was adopted, the Sendai framework was developed in 2015 at another UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction held in 2015 in Sendai, Japan. And it included 5 priority of action instead of 5 in HFA. So the first priority was understanding disaster risks, and second, strengthening disaster risk governance, and third, investing in DRR for resilience, and fourth is enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and build back better in recovery. And in addition, there are some keywords emphasized in Sendai framework, such as science, innovations, health, and multi-hazards. For instance, the word of health was mentioned in HFA only 3 times, but in the Center framework, it was 34 times. And multi-hazards was also mentioned 11 times in a Center framework, but only twice in HFA. So that now you can see the difference, the difference of between the HFA and also the Center framework. And I also would like to emphasize one thing here in relation to the COVID-19. And the Sendai framework is not targeting only natural hazards, but also man-made hazards, as well as related environmental and technological and biological hazards and risks. Therefore, we also need to consider the risk management, including biological hazards, such as COVID-19, as our future task and responsibility. This is a very broad topic and issue. Therefore, we'd like to address this theme in the future webinar by APRU Multi-Hazards Program. Another new element in the Sendai framework is it has clear 7 targets. And I will not go into the details here, but it is also a new aspect to highlight what we need to do and what we need to achieve in the next 15 years. And the next, I'd like to talk about more details about the role of different stakeholders. So when we talk about DR stakeholders, they include governments, NGOs, international organizations, and communities as traditional stakeholders. Recently, the roles of stakeholders such as local governments, national and local NGOs, the private sector, academia, media were also strongly highlighted. I will now talk about main roles of each stakeholder. They are not limited to the ones included in my presentation today. I would highlight only major ones here. UN agencies will support national governments in the implementation, monitoring, following up, and reviewing DR initiatives. Also, they advocate the involvement of all the stakeholders in DR and develop various guidelines and case studies to share the knowledge and experiences. And international NGOs will also do advocacy, project implementation with fundraising, and various programs including trainings. And regional entities and organizations such as ASEAN also has their own DR programs to help each other's DR activities. They focus on regional and cross-boundary issues and strengthening regional collaboration and identifying regional solutions and guidelines. And the next level is the national level. At the national level, as stated in the Sendai framework, the national government has the overall responsibility for reducing disaster risk. Also, they are expected to empower local authorities and local communities for disaster risk reduction activities by sharing financial and human resources, as well as decision-making responsibilities and providing capacity developing opportunities. Also, national and local NGOs will have a significant responsibility in project implementation simply because they are closer to the communities and understand local issues and culture. They also may be able to come up with the most effective and efficient solutions based the community needs using the local resources. And needless to say, it is important to maximize the local resources. And at the local level, the role of local government is indispensable. They could lead the local DR planning and implementation. Also, they are the ones who need to be the first responder. Therefore, they need to know how to prepare for effective response as well. And they could also develop local policies and guidelines in line with national strategy. And communities are definitely one of the main actors in disaster risk reduction. And they are encouraged to participate in the preparatory process to reflect their needs and resources into the future DR activities. In addition, there are various DR activities that can be led by communities themselves, such as an evacuation drill and awareness raising programs. It will be important to work together with the local authorities and NGOs to support their initiatives. And in addition to the traditional DR actors, our expectation to other DR stakeholders is also very high. And recently, there's more and more needs for the private sector to contribute to the DR activities in addition to the response and the recovery efforts. And to develop a BCP, could a basis for any kinds of DR activities. And they also contribute to the DR efforts by using and sharing their technology, innovation, and research results. And furthermore, media also has a certain role to play, such as distributing the critical information DR and supporting early warning system. And about academia, I will elaborate more since we are from academia. I believe most of our audience are also from academia. So we need to think how we can contribute to future DR activities further in addition to conducting research. So Sendai framework also highlights the role of academia as, firstly, focus on disaster risk factors and scenarios. And second, increase research for regional and national and local applications. And third, support actions by local communities and authorities. And fourth is support the interface between policy and science for decision making. We are very familiar with the first two things as they are related to researches, which we have been doing for a long time. However, the third and fourth ones are slightly different from the first and second ones. We are expected to support local communities and authorities, as well as the interface between policy and science for decision making. So the last two things are quite different and also challenging, and for all of academia as well. So the question is, how could we do that? Mainly the third one and fourth one. So Sendai framework shows and also and encourages us some activities under each priority. So under each priority for action, there should be roles we can play. For the priority 1, understanding disaster risk, it is encouraged to promote dialogue among scientific communities and other stakeholders, including policymakers. So we, academia, often works within our own circle by sharing researches, papers, and so on. But we are expected to use these results for actual DR activities. And it will be the first step to start communication with other sectors and facilitate such opportunities. And for investing in DR, it is also expected to develop new products that would assist developing countries and their specific challenges. We should know that without understanding their needs, it is not possible to develop any solutions. That means we also need to understand the needs and challenges of developing countries to work together. Then for enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response under priority 4, it is also required to promote the application of simple and low-cost equipment and facilities. And we also have to remember that our role is not only innovate the new things and very technological and innovative things, but rather we also have to promote the application of simple and low-cost equipment as well. And only to mobilize a high-tech material is not our responsibility, but rather to invest in DR measures, which would be most suitable for the people's needs. It's quite important. And it is something, again, we need to remember. And this is my last slide. And I would like to highlight some of the key points of academia's role here, especially the role of academia and also the science and technology. And first, we need to understand the limitation of science and technology. And science and technology cannot solve everything. We have to combine technologies and human behavior and actions that can be developed by education and awareness raising. And now, and I think recently there are so many the joint researches and also the development by both natural scientists and also the social scientists. So that's, I think that's increase more the result of our joint researches. And also it is crucial to conduct interdisciplinary research to understand the needs, challenges, and solutions comprehensively. And it highlights the importance of combination of natural and social science. And third is working together, especially with practitioners, could be an excellent idea to make the research results and very usable. And fourth, it is our important role to train future DLR experts who could work for governments, the private sector, and schools. So in this way, our knowledge could be maintained in different parts as well. Okay, so that's all for today, the presentation. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be very happy to take some questions and also answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tohoku. Hello. We've got very good talk. It's also a good reminder for myself what we're doing. And we've had some really good questions coming in, and thank you very much. Keep sending your questions, please. So the first question I would like to ask from Mariko in the Philippines, and it's relating to the pandemic, the condition that we're having today. And she's asking, is having different kind of situation and status, what can you recommend for institutions or businesses to have in the current situation? A continuity plan, a recovery plan, a resilience plan, and how can each plan differ from one another?
Okay, wow, that's very complex the question, I think, and it covers all the aspects of disaster preparedness. So thank you for the question. As I mentioned, the first thing is that, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's very important for all of us to understand disasters, not only the natural disasters, but rather we need to tackle all types of disasters, biohazards and also technological hazards. And another thing we have been talking quite a long time is NATEC as well. So to take all these disasters in our preparedness, and there's one approach, it's called the all hazards approach. And it is encouraged in the US and in Europe, and as an approach of the disaster preparedness and disaster risk reduction. So that firstly, I think we should understand the difference of all the risks of disasters, and we should have the holistic approach. Then secondly, to prepare for the planning documents like BCP and emergency planning documents is actually it's the foundation of all the types of preparedness. So that's something we should start immediately if you don't have that kind of preparedness plans. It's for all the entities, for governments, private sector, and schools, and for all of us. And we need to discuss about that kind of emergency planning. Then after that, we have to do a lot of simulation exercise following that plan, and we have to anticipate all types of disaster risks, and we have to conduct the risk assessment and drills, simulation exercise, so that there are so many things we have to do. So, but as I mentioned, the planning is the first thing you can do and we should do. So that based on the planning, I think you can tap into so many activities based on your the local context and also the culture and habits. And there are so many local elements you have to consider into that planning.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure you could probably talk another 10 minutes about this. That's good. We have another question here, which is probably not an easy question either, but considering, I mean, because we are in this current situation, I think we get a lot of COVID-19 related questions, but considering the current COVID-19 situation, the question is from Nasif Asan. Do you think that the Sendai framework for DRR should be considered for an amendment? Should it be reviewed, for example?
Oh, I see. Okay. No, as I mentioned, Sendai framework already includes the elements and highlights the importance of both natural and man-made disasters. So the document itself already highlighted. So based on that, and that's us who have to think about how we can implement that, and also that come up with some ideas what we should do based on the each country's context, and also the we have the resources we have. So I think we have quite a lot of homeworks in the future based on these experiences of COVID-19. Now we understand the need for preparedness of biological disasters. So I'm sure there are so many ideas will come up later on. So that's quite a great thing to do, to share that kind of knowledge and experiences in the future activities, and of course under the multi-hazard program. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to all of these activities. We've got another question from Sabit Lani. And there are two questions, but I'll pick one specifically as a comparison. She is asking what factors, or what are the main factors that make Japan's DRR effective that can be adopted by developing countries? So very generic question.
I see. Okay. I think we quite well came up with disaster risk reduction combined infrastructure, hard part, and also soft part, like disaster education. So infrastructure, it maybe takes time and it requires quite a lot of budget. But at the same time, education and awareness raising activities can be done even at the community levels. So we are doing both actually. And the community has a quite strong leadership and initiatives in Japan. And they do that sometimes by themselves, and also they do that with civil society organizations and local government as well. So definitely the collaboration with different sectors is very important. And if it is a little bit difficult to do right away, the infrastructure part, then you can start with the more education and awareness raising part. That can be done everywhere. I think it's no matter where it is, developed countries, but I think it takes that kind of approach can be taken everywhere.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think we've got time for one more question, which is also one that I ask myself very often. So that's from Daniela Alvarez Gallo. And she's asking, how can we achieve the cooperation between science and policy? How can we guarantee it with the hierarchy in government to scientists, for example?
Right, okay, thank you. And it's also a very challenging thing, I must say. And a good thing is that some countries already have that kind of platform, and which includes all different sectors, government and private sector and academia and NGOs, international organizations. So we have that kind of platform already existent. So based on that kind of platform, and we can start up the discussions and dialogue, and there are so many impacts we can put on policy making. So if you don't have that kind of platform, definitely you and academia can take a first step. You can approach to the government and policy makers to share your data and research results. And that's something you have to do additional work as an academia, but that's something we have to consider and take the responsibility, I think.
And thank you very much. And I would like to add, joining a program such as the Multi-Hazard Program, which anybody can, you don't have to be a member institution, but you can join, you can sign up with a mailing list. You can email Professor Izumi or APRU that you want to be linked into the mailing list is another way. You learn, you get a network and you get support, hopefully, and get ideas of doing this. Thank you very much, Professor Izumi. And I think I'll pass back over to you to continue with your summer school. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christina, for your wonderful moderation, Q&A discussion. Thank you so much. So now I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Mr. Takeshi Komino. He is the General Secretary of Church World Service Japan and co-chairperson of Japan Platform. Also, he serves as Secretary General and a member of Executive Committee for Asian Disaster Reduction and Response Network, and Joint Secretariat of Japan CSO Coalition for DR, and Chairperson of Japan Quality and Accountability Network. In addition, he has tremendous experience in disaster management and development in many countries, including Afghanistan. So we are very lucky today to have you, Takeshi, and I have known him quite a long time, and he is doing excellent and wonderful jobs. So over to you, Takeshi.
Thank you, Izumi-san, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for participating in this summer school. I'm really delighted to be here with you today. The title of the presentation that I wanted to give today is the Emerging Trends and the Role of NGOs / civil society organizations. Just one second. Okay. Izumi-san, is the sound all right? Just wanted to check. It's all right. Alrighty. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. So I'm representing more of a civil society side, NGO side, in this disaster risk reduction, and I would like to capture on what are some of the emerging trends these days, and what we think is our role, in fact, the changing role in the current era. So just to recap some of the trends. So in our region, in Asia, where we live, the region is heavily affected by natural hazards. I think it's apparent from various data, such as this. So the share of death by disasters by continent, Asia accounts for more than half of the disaster casualties in the world. Now, in addition to these natural hazard risks, this world is also facing with the conflict risks. So we're seeing over 30 conflicts that are happening in the world as we speak today. And on top of these disaster risks that we're facing. Now, when we take a look at, when we take a look at the food insecurity level, it's increasing year by year. So more and more countries are becoming food insecure. And if you take a look at these average number of emergency appeals that are happening globally, the average year now is more than 9 years. So the prolonged emergency or crisis are becoming the new normal in the humanitarian arena. But when we take a look at the resources are not increasing. This is where it forces all of us to produce more impact with the similar amount of resources at hand. And this requires innovation. We need to produce more impact with what we have today. Now, in terms of the global warming, we're seeing the increasing trend of global warming. And as a result of that, the weather has changed. For example, the rain, the heat, and you must experience these things in where you live as well. And as a result, what we're seeing is the rise in the hydrometeorological disasters like floods, typhoons, as well as the climatological disasters like droughts. And the extreme temperature, the heat issue, is on the rise in many parts of the world. And as Izumi-san explained, we're not only dealing with one hazard risks. The world is very complex. And for example, this shows the concept from one of the researchers done for the G7 meeting in Japan some years ago. They call it the climate fragility. So cascading impact and these links between different risks. For example, in many of the countries, these severe weather patterns are triggering significant impact, negative impact on people's livelihood, and thus triggering the migration. And often these migration happen to cities. And when these migration happens in a big mass, then it also triggers more construction work to happen in these cities. And when these construction happens in the cities, in many countries, it also leads to stagnant water, which also leads to more areas for mosquitoes to grow. And then it leads to dengue fever and health emergencies. And then it also affects people's livelihood and income patterns and so on and so forth. So things are connected. And that's what I wanted to say with this slide. And that's probably the new normal that we live. The risk landscape is complex. And as the UNSCAP warned in their report, the consequence could be beyond what we actually predict and or experienced so far. And that's a new normal we have to adapt to. So to highlight some of the challenges in Asia, first of all, the rainfall patterns are changing. It's definitely changing in Japan also. But when we take a look at our infrastructure that we have today, it's all built in the 20th century, most of them. And the way that we live today are not really coping with this changing weather patterns. We're also seeing increasingly more emergence of the widespread water scarcity, so more droughts. And also because the rainfall patterns are changing, the more rain in the shorter period of time, and that causes more frequent floods. So in this changing weather, changing environment, we need to take more early action. So it's too late when things actually emerge as disasters. But before disasters, we need to take more early actions to mitigate those impacts. But when and where to start is a big question for people. It requires quite a significant investment, both from the individual level as well as more governance levels. Because of the migration related to these extreme weathers, there are intensified risks in urban areas. And in many areas, these climate risks are also leading to political and social risks. So in the Climate for Peace report, which included this concept of climate fragility that I explained a few slides ago, they also talked about this phenomenon of drought several years before the Syrian conflict have started. So what happened with that drought was the drought led to the increase in food prices, and that led to more pressure on people's lives. And that was one of the factors why people were out on the streets to protest at the beginning. And after that, we know what happened afterwards. So dealing with disasters is not really only the response, but we actually need solutions to mitigate the impact of the increasing disaster risks that we're facing today. And we need more international cooperation to do this. But we're living in the era where many countries are nationalizing, but yet many of these risks are being shared risks. So in terms of disaster risk reduction, we see that it's not really about a competition. but it's really about the coexistence and how we tackle this big issue together with what we know and what we have. On top of this, the COVID-19 is posing further risks. And this chart just shows different age groups and the hospitalization record, the percentages. So showing different age groups or different pre-existing health conditions lead to different risks to this emergency. Now, what does that mean in the risk management landscape? So as Izumi-san explained about Hyogo transformation from Hyogo Framework for Action, Sendai Framework until now, Hyogo Framework for Action for us led to significant progress on governance and institutional arrangement. So many countries have established their disaster management law or National Disaster Management Authority during this time. And the capacity of disaster preparedness has improved significantly in many of the countries. And we see that from statistics that the actual number of people who die from disasters are decreasing globally, which is good news. HFA focused more on developing countries, but you know, when they were doing the evaluation of HFA achievements, the priority for action 4 of Hyogo Framework for Action, which was on the underlying risk factors, this is the priority for action that scored the lowest. So in terms of governance, create the law, create NDMAs, scored high, but the underlying risk factors scored low in HFA. And we start to realize that even if we establish these mechanisms at the national level, things don't always trickle down and show as a result of disaster risks being managed. So in the Sendai framework, we focus more on understanding of the risks and investment to mitigate this impact. And the focus is coming more and more towards local governance of risks. For example, the target E of increasing countries and local authorities with these disaster management or disaster risk reduction plans is one good example of that. And this Sendai framework for DRR focus both on rich countries and poor countries, the middle income countries, and in the context of international cooperation. But things are shifting a bit, and that's what we see these days, is that, as explained earlier, COVID-19 is creating this environment that different people, a different person has different risks. And all countries globally are affected with similar risk at the same time. And this is quite new for people who are running this disaster management sector nowadays, I think. I mean, history of humankind is probably not new, but in our lifetime, it's probably new. Now, what does that mean though in disaster risk management landscape is that these risks need to be thought as personalized risks. And these risk reduction actions need to happen at the household level. So not at the central level, not at the local authority level or the local governance unit level, but this risk reduction measures needs to come down to the household level. And that's the big challenge that we're facing today with COVID-19. Now, someone asked a question earlier about what part of Japan's experience can be transferred to other countries. This is a chart that shows the history of Japan's disaster management from 1945 till recently. And it shows number of people, number of casualties in each years. And as you can see, after the Second World War, Japan has had many casualties from typhoons, these floodings. So thousands and thousands of casualties happened at that time. But then Japan also started to make these investments into risk reduction measures. And still, we do have a big number of casualties when it comes to earthquakes and tsunamis. But from the recurrent typhoons and floodings and landslides, our casualties are still limited. We still have casualties, but it's not as high as what we have decades ago. One of the things that Japan does on this is creation of these hazard maps. And in some countries, we call this disaster risk reduction maps because it doesn't only capture where is dangerous, but it needs to also capture where is safe. And these maps and plans are distributed to each household so that people can identify where their house is on the map and what are the risks that they're living together. And that's important. And this hazard map is what links the government plans and government efforts, as well as the community actions. So after the East Japan earthquake and tsunami, Japan is focusing more and more towards creation of this community-based disaster management plan. And this hazard map, or DR map, as you call it, links with what the government does and what the community's actions are. This is critical because, you know, as Japan has went through the urbanization process in 1960s and 70s, so more and more people start to live in the cities. That means we have to create more areas for people to live. And that forced us to make these river basins narrower and make more space for people to live. And as a consequence, what's happening now is that more than half of Japan's population is living under the river water level. And more than 75% of our national assets are beneath the river water level. So you can imagine when flooding like this happens, and this is from the Western Japan floods some time back, and the similar thing is happening now in Kumamoto and other parts of Kyushu. And unfortunately, we're hearing the news of significant floodings happening in China at the moment. So a lot of people's properties and livelihoods are now at more risks because of the changing weather patterns these days. Now, what's Japan doing in this time of crisis is that recently Japan has revised its warning system significantly. And I won't go through all the levels, but if you can focus on the level 5 of this slide, you know, this was introduced newly. And this basically says it's too late for you to evacuate. Don't think of evacuation now, because the only thing that you need to do now is to think about how to protect your life. And you know, these had to be introduced in order to save lives. And on the right-hand side of this slide, and I'm sorry this is in Japanese, but this is a tool that's called My Timeline. And this is increasingly being used now in Japan. What it does is there's a warning level from 1 till 5. For example, when we have typhoons, we start with the rain warnings and typhoon warnings. And then when, for example, when the breach of river water is imminent, then we have different warning levels and so on. People, households with different vulnerabilities need to evacuate at different times. So the evacuation activity of each household need to be optimized as per their vulnerability. And that's what this timeline is supposed to do. For example, if I have my grandparents living together, then probably we need to evacuate sooner than other people because it takes more time. And if there's a little bit of water on the streets, it makes it hugely difficult for them to walk. So, and same thing can be said for the households with the young infants and so on and so forth. So this My Timeline is increasingly being used. And some of the municipalities who do this well with each of the household, we see that they're evacuation is faster and more effective against these risks. Now, this is my last slide. So in conclusion, we're seeing that in the new normal age, individual actions are more important than ever to save people from these increasing risks. And this is different from, for example, when we think about the earthquake risks and when we focus only on the building codes enforcement, then individual action does not matter so much. But when it comes to these hydrometeorological disaster risks, then people need to know exactly when they're supposed to evacuate to where. They need to know exactly where is dangerous and where is safe. So individual knowledge and actions are more important than ever. And this is where civil society organizations' greatest role is, probably, because these organizations often work with the people at the grassroots. Government, for example, in Japan, the government policies always need to be done on this principle of fairness and equality. But then the specific assistance needs to be provided based on the individual needs. And this is where the government and civil society can work hand in hand. Sometimes in Japan these days, we see that over-reliance on the volunteers. And volunteers are great. They're wonderful people, and we need them. But the amount of volunteers that we can have is uncertain. And in this COVID-19 age, we're seeing that too. Flood and landslide affected parts of Kyushu. They can't have these mass amount of people coming to help them out because of this COVID-19 risks and concerns. DR it shouldn't be something special anymore, and it needs to be embedded in our lives. For example, the emergency speakers that we have in Japan, that we have many of them in the community, they play this music every day at 5 p.m. And for school children, it's a music that they hear and they think that it's already late. We need to go home. For office worker, same thing. It's getting late. We need to pack up. But they do this because they want to test these emergency speakers every day. So it's more of a disaster risk reduction measures, but embedded in people's lives. And people don't think this as disaster risk reduction initiative, but it's something embedded in their lives, nothing special. Different actors have different roles, and as Izumi-san has mentioned, and we need to tackle these risks, increasing risk collectively. And we need to have this sense of partnership. So we use this principle, we call it principle of partnership in our sector. That's based on equality, the transparency, results-oriented approach, responsibility, the shared responsibility, and complementarity. This new normal age that we're living in right now probably means that the new way of thinking, a new way of doing is required. This change, it shouldn't be just a rhetoric, but we need to live up to the current needs, and we need to transform our current role to those needs. The challenges are immense, particularly with the COVID-19 situation nowadays, but we also think that they also offer this opportunity for us to improve and transform. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you so much, Takeshi, for your very informative information based on your experiences in NGO. So we have quite a lot of questions, especially about COVID-19 as well. So first one, I'd like to ask you, sometimes, even if people are aware of the hazards they are exposed to, they choose not to take action due to their attachment to their homes. how can we overcome that? That's first one. And second one is how can the community or civil society ensure there are adequate risk reduction strategies in place when there is widespread corruption in the government? Okay, firstly, two questions.
Okay, very important question and very difficult challenges, I would say. For the first one, for those who choose not to take action, we're seeing these evidences that when we ask people in these disaster-affected area, why did you evacuate or why did you not evacuate, for example, there's a significant role for the neighborhood relationship to play. So if the local authority will tell you to evacuate, you may not evacuate because you may not trust their information so much. But if your neighbor tells you that you need to evacuate, then that information carries more weight. So we're seeing that the one-way flow of information is not enough. There needs to be a multiple information flow around these disaster risks during those crisis time. So that's one concrete recommendation from Japan's experience. What to do in the widespread corruption? It's not easy to say. But for example, in Afghanistan, what we did when we wanted to promote more of these risk reduction plans locally is to create these team intentionally that multiple different players are involved. Like the local government officials are involved, the local community representatives are involved, university people are involved. So create those teams as multi-sectoral teams intentionally at the beginning. Is because then there will be some checks and balances within the team while we go about it. So try to introduce that multi-sector partnership-based approach more and more into the program design or initiative design, I think is one thing that we can do.
Thank you, Takeshi. I think this is quite a big issue which has been discussed quite a long time, I think. So do you think the situation is getting better or it's still the same? What do you see, the current status?
You mean in terms of the risk reduction plans? I think it's improving. I think it's improving significantly. That more and more local government, I can't say for sure about the central governments, but more and more local governments and local community governance units are creating their own risk reduction plans, which I think is a great achievement of Sendai Framework Target E. But a lot of NGOs are also focusing on creating these plans with the community that's contextualized and that's fit for that community. It's great to see these plans of specific community is only for that specific community. So the content sometimes varies greatly from one community to another. And that's how it's supposed to be. So I think it's evolving and it's picking up very much these days.
Thank you, Takeshi. I totally agree with you. So the next question is about the flood, the current flood situation in Japan. And although Japan is considered, we have very good and well prepared for disasters, but why we are having that kind of damage and impact this time? So for better preparedness, what should we do for the future? In particular, now we are facing to the issue both COVID-19 and the flood, and how we can tackle these, the multiple hazards.
Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, people think that Japan is very advanced in risk reduction, and I think partly that's true. But that doesn't mean that Japan does not have these hazards. So it may not turn into too big of a disaster. For example, landslide. If you take a look at the landslide, Japan has more than 1,000 landslides per year. 1,000, And when it comes to earthquakes, we have thousands and thousands of earthquakes in a year. And what happens with these flooding, for example, is that, so I've talked about the individual and the need for more individual actions, but then Japan is increasingly becoming a sort of aging society. And many of these elderly who are living alone or only with their elderly couple, it's often so difficult for them to evacuate on their own. And many of the people who lost their lives in the current flood right now are those people who were left behind in their evacuation. So the cause of their death, most of them so far, was drowning, so which means they couldn't evacuate on time. So I think we need to do more and more in terms of these self-help as well as a mutual help at the community level, so that community they do understand who is more vulnerable and who requires more time for evacuation. And we need to provide resources and decision-making authorities for them, because they can decide what is the most effective risk reduction measures that they can take. And those efforts need to be supported from outside through either financial or technical, and that's what I think the role of the local governments these days.
So how do you see the difficulties and challenges to tackle the response and recovery under two different types of disasters, COVID-19 and flood right now?
So after the floods, what usually happens is that the things need to be cleaned up, right? So there's lots of debris and mud and everything. Your furniture and TV and everything needs to be taken out, and it needs to be dumped in the garbage area. And that's the first step you need to do, right? And then once before it dries up, and you need to take these floors and walls and then make sure that they're clean and they're dried. And so it's very labor intensive. Very labor intensive. Can these people, elderly people in the aging the society, in some of the areas, the aging ratio in our society is more than 50-60%. So most of the people in certain rural villages are elderly people. So can they do those labor intensive work is a big question. So they clearly require hands, extra hands. But this extra hands is difficult to mobilize because of COVID-19. So that's what I mean when I say we can't rely too much on volunteers. We need to be smarter in how to prepare and mobilize those extra hands from other professional agencies, including the government and private sector agencies, because otherwise, I don't think they can come to the starting point of their recovery yet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
We are struggling. We are struggling very much. Every day, there's an emergence of COVID-19 new cases in these disaster-affected areas. Local people are asking the Tokyo-based people not to come because of the fear of COVID-19, but they don't have enough hands to work on these cleanups and recovery efforts. So it's quite a chaotic, confusing time at the moment. So it doesn't mean that we have all the answers now. We're as confused as everyone else, but trying to do one thing at a time, I think.
Yeah, that's also true. And in not only CSOs, NGOs, but rather us, academia, and everyone has to think about for future preparedness and disaster risk reduction, taking into consideration that kind of very complex situation, I suppose. Okay, so this is the last question for you, a quite overall and fundamental question maybe for you. And what is the greatest challenge for CSOs and NGOs across various cultures that you see in your interaction with other international CSOs? And do you have any idea how to overcome it?
I think the biggest challenge is ourselves. You know, the society clearly requires new way of looking at these risks, a new way of doing a new way of coming up with solutions. So things does not complete within our sector at all. The solutions cannot be made possible unless we partner with other sectors. That's given. But for many of us who have been comfortable in just, you know, working on our project, for example, it's difficult for them to change the way that they do things, or it's difficult for us to change the way that we do things. So, so that is the big challenge. And one of the things that, for example, ADR and the network that I also represent, I think one of the role for such networks is to be a little bit forward thinker. And this should be an area where people can come and try out new things and even fail and learn, without having such space of trying out new innovative things. I don't think it's possible for individual agencies to transform as per the needs of the society in the speed that we want. So we need to transform. The million-dollar question is how, and I think there's a role to play for networks like ADR, but also like APRU. I think that's the role that that's the space that you're providing for people.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Takeshi, for your presentation and answering all the questions. And I hope we can work together in the future. And as you mentioned, APRU and NGOs are also a very good partner for us. So I hope we can continue our collaboration in the future. Thank you so much. And we are very happy to have you from NGO sector. Thank you. Okay, so next I would like to introduce Professor Mikio Ishiwatari. He's Senior Advisor on Disaster Management and Water Resources Management at Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, and Visiting Professor, Graduate School of Frontier Sciences, the University of Tokyo. And he has been engaged in projects and research works of disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and water. And he led the formulation of the Japanese assistance policies of climate change adaptation and community-based disaster management. And he also worked at the World Bank as Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist and the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, and Transport, Japan for 17 years. So we are very lucky to have you, Professor Ishiwatari, today, and thank you so much for your joining us. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for Takako-san. And thank you very much for attending so many people, over 250. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, I would start, yes, this one. Yes. Okay, my topic is Japanese experience and assistance in flood risk management. As already Takako-san explained, Japan has software measures and hardware measures. Komino-san already explained evacuation or hazard mapping of Japanese system. So I would explain mainly some hardware measures. Already discussed, Japan is currently fighting against flooding and use such experience to support other countries. This is today's my topic. Okay, so as already discussed, currently flooding is happening in some areas. This is a picture in Kumamoto. In Kumamoto, flooding happened 2 weeks ago. And Kumamoto, you may have heard because earthquake happened several years ago, Kumamoto earthquake. This year, the prefecture suffered from flooding, and it's still ongoing. And we call Tsuyu, Bayu. In Chinese, I think you may call it, yeah, something, yeah. And today I just received warning from a meteorological agency in Tokyo area. The Met agency issued warning for heavy rainfall. So still this rainy season is ongoing, and the Met agency says this weekend another heavy rain may happen. And this is a rainfall as you can see in Kyushu area, western south part of area, this heavy rainfall happened, over 800 millimeter. It's half of a yearly annual rainfall. And in Kumamoto, in Kumagawa River, suffered from flooding. over 2,000 hectare area submerged, over 6,000 houses flooded in this river basin. As of last week, already destroyed 77 and damaged house over 15,000. Over 2,000 people at evacuation centers. And as I said, it's still ongoing situation. So this is current situation. I would explain last year's disaster and the effect of our Japanese countermeasures. Typhoon Hagibis 2019 hit eastern part of Japan in October. This is a picture of Tamagawa. This is a southern border of Tokyo metropolitan. Opposite side is Kawasaki. You can see high-rising apartment. We call it tower mansion. It's a very high stages mansion apartment, and they flooding threatened this high-end area. And in Tokyo area, this is the evacuation center. Even in Tokyo downtown, some people evacuated to shelters. And flooding happened in Tamagawa River. This is a Futago Tamagawa. It's a high end. So just one block from Tamagawa, it's a commercial district. You can see Ferragamo shops, and there are many high end such as luxurious shopping center. So this block itself is okay, but the next block was flooded. And the Denyen-Chofu, this is again, high-end residential area. This area also flooded. It's a high-end place, so BMW was also flooded. And university is also flooded. So this is last year's rainfall. Again, record-breaking rainfall. Every year, record-breaking rainfall. So last year flooding mainly happened in eastern part of Japan, Tokyo and Tohoku areas. This is a record in Japanese recording history. In Hakone, recorded over 1,000 millimeter rainfall. And the question is this effect of climate change? Yeah, answer is yes. This is a 10 years ago's sea temperature. You can see last year more wider red areas. It means temperature near Japan, sea temperature was higher than 1 or 2 degrees than average. It means typhoon with very strong power and receiving power from ocean and landed. So damaged all eastern areas. And the famous picture is Shinkansen, bread train base was submerged. You can see this is a river. This Chikumagawa River was flooded, and this Shinkansen base was also flooded. So damage is not so small. Over 100 people died, and 70 to 80% are elderly, old people. Over 100,000 houses were inaugurated. It's never small damage. Yeah, and I want to show effectiveness of Japanese system, flood protection system. This is the Kanto area, and Tokyo metropolitan area is the center. And this sign means flooded area. You notice Tokyo metropolitan area, this area is well protected. Flooded area is outside Tokyo and the neighboring prefectures. So I would show how Japanese flood protection systems worked. As Komino-san, Takeshi explained, Japan invested huge money for flood protection systems. This time, such flood protection system worked to protect metropolitan areas. Actually, Tokyo is a risk area of flooding. 1947, one typhoon hit this area. Over 1,000 people, died in this area. This is a Tokyo downtown, and you can see lady wearing kimono or some Japanese shops here flooded. And this is a estimate. If big flood happened here in Tokyo, over 2,000 people will die. And 680,000 houses will be flooded in Tokyo area. This is another river, Arakawa. Yeah, also over 1 million people live in this flooding area. So this is a simulation, Ginza. It's the busiest commercial street in Tokyo or in Japan. Again, this is a simulation. So once flooding happens, Ginza area will be flooded like this. So this is the water level, river water level at Typhoon Hagibis. Tonegawa and Arakawa, two major rivers in Tokyo area, they recorded a very high, very crucial water level. So Typhoon Hagibis threatened Tokyo metropolitan area. As I said, 1,000 people are at risk, and 1,000 people. In the worst case scenario, 1,000 people may have died. Okay, so how Japanese flood protection system worked, I would explain. So this is the Tonegawa and Arakawa, two major river basins. Upstream Tonegawa, first, there are dams. 145 million cubic meter were stored in dams in upstream. And this is a Yamba Dam, just constructed last year. So this is a still trial operation period, but this worked. So before flooding and after flooding, this dam stored 75 million cubic meter of flooding. And in middle stream, there were some reservoirs. These reservoirs were also stored flood water, Watarase River, and there are several river reservoirs. So this is a Watarase River. This is a normal time, but last year, this reservoir became like this, stored a huge amount of water, flooding water. And downstream, lower stream, there were diversion channel. One diversion channel constructed in underground, 50 meters below ground. And this tunnel stored 12 million cubic meter flooding water. And another channel, diversion channel, is this Arakawa. This is an old river, Sumidagawa, flooding to Asakusa. And 100 years ago, government constructed new channel, artificial channel, diversion channel. This time, this diversion channel worked and protected this Tokyo downtown area, including Asakusa. So, in upstream, there are dams. In middle stream, there are reservoirs. In downstream, there are channels. And these facilities, these structures systematically worked and to mitigate damage in Tokyo area. And I would emphasize that this is an effort, not only a very short period. This is an effort over 1 century. Arakawa River Channel was completed in 1930s. And other dams were also needed some decades to complete. So such efforts for the over a century paid off this time. Okay, I have still some time. So I would explain how such experience can be used for other countries' support. As already discussed, we had software measures and hardware measures. This is the case in Vietnam. Vietnam is also suffering from flooding as Japan. And one issue is riverbank erosion. Riverbank is eroded and some farmland, houses, roads, infrastructures were damaged. So this project mainly focused on software measures and involved communities. So this is a photo of a local workshop involving local government and various CSOs and stakeholders, and producing such a hazard mapping. And conducting evacuation drills, as we did in Japan, and the evacuation center supported. And already discussed, education, disaster management education. Based on of Japanese experience, we transferred such skills and technology. And riverbank erosion, we introduced green infrastructure, greenery, and it's not so clear what's the countermeasures because it's green. And underwater, there's some materials using stones or bamboo or some local materials. And you can see greenery, and actually under this greenery, a stone put for foundation. So in this case, such a new method, new countermeasures was developed by using local materials and Japanese experience. Actually, we had such experience in our history. And in Vietnam, they also had their own experience and technology. We combined and developed this countermeasures. So it's a technical capability, means no need such a high-tech material. They can use local materials. Financial, it's a low cost. It's not so expensive. And capacity building, we understand key is a local government. Local governments, they are supporting local communities. So we try to strengthen their capacity. And we invited them to Japan also, and we shared our experience. Well, some structure measures are also included in such a training. I don't have so much time, so just quickly. So hardware measures in Metro Manila. We supported flood protection in Metro Manila for some maybe decades, 3 or 4 decades, and supporting some financial matters also, constructing pumping stations in Metro Manila and constructing embankments. This is passive Marikina River flowing center in Metro Manila. And this is gate. So protecting Metro Manila from high tide, storm surge. Once something happens, this gate will be closed and protect this area. Okay, so this is my message. Japan is, as I said, fighting still now against flooding. And we had such a history and experience, and using such experience to support other countries in strengthening software measures and hardware measures. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, Professor Ishwatari. It was very informative and we learned a lot about the flood protection system in Japan. So we have quite a lot of questions. And first thing is related to flood, of course. And how is the flood insurance in Japan? How popular and familiar that procedure in Japan? And that's first one. And second one is, how does the education program about hazard maps in particular delivered to community?
Okay, yeah, first infrastructure. Yeah, we have, insurance. We have insurance program against flooding. It's embedded of housing insurance. So housing insurance has an option to attach flood insurance. It works. And in case of flooding, yes, insurance company try to pay such a money immediately after flooding. And this is helpful for affected people to recover their lives. And one lesson would be it takes some time to develop such an insurance system, not immediately come up. So first they start some program and they improve such an insurance program, and currently everybody can use it. And it's a very unique, it's a private-based insurance. We know US system, US is a government supported, but Japanese flood insurance system is a private-based system. Yeah, education to community hazard mapping, yes, this is still a challenge. Yeah, this time in Kumamoto, over 70,000 people died, and Komino-san explained last year over 100 people died. And actually hazard map is very precise and very correct. This year also, most of flooded area already hazard map shown such risk area, almost same area. So if community members understood correctly hazard mapping, human losses must have been less. Yeah, so this is still a challenge, how to share such information, how to educate and how to lead such a disaster information to evacuation. Yeah, still we are struggling, and this is a common challenge across this region, Asian region, I believe.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned about the flood situation last year in Tokyo, but how about this year? Also, the western part of Japan was strongly hit by flood this year. So do you think the affected areas this year also had enough hazard mapping and also the flood protection mechanism like Tokyo had? Is that really depending on the areas and about the level of the flood protection system?
Yeah, good point. And sometimes it's controversial. First, I would explain safety level of flood protection system in Japan. It's not same. In some strategic area is well protected, like Tokyo or Osaka, commercial center or political center. And as I shown, some rural area or tributaries, safety level is lower than such major rivers. This is a priority issue and cost effectiveness issue and political issue. So it's not so easy to apply the same safety level throughout the country. There are some differences. And hazard mapping, yeah. Hazard mapping, yes, this year also clearly show hazard map already showed some risk area. And this year's inundation area in Kumagawa is almost same as shown in hazard map. So if people fully understand such a risk of hazard map clearly, yeah, this such a hazard map information could help to reduce human losses or damages.
Yep. So in addition to that hazard map, how about the community memory about flood, from the history, how that kind of experience should be passed on, and also how about today, how is the connection between old and young peoples about flood resilience?
Yeah, this is another issue in Japan. Yeah, definitely we had such a knowledge or experience. Our society was created based on agriculture, rice production. And each community fought against flooding together. But because of urbanization or because of modernization, our lifestyle, our culture, our society are changing. So our community ties, relationship in communities are becoming weaker and weaker. So as Takako-san mentioned, our such a strong community ties are becoming weakened. It's leading to weakening our disaster management system. So how to strengthen again such our community efforts or community-based activities? This is another challenge.
Yeah, that's true. It's quite challenging to pass on the experience and lessons learned to the younger generation. That's also our responsibility, but I think it's still very, very challenging. Okay, so another question from Myanmar. Flood is a high risk for Myanmar as well. And, but it is very difficult for them to construct that, very strong infrastructure like dam and riverbank. So for that kind of country, least developed countries, mitigation or providing humanitarian assistance, what would be the most effective way to prevent and mitigate the future risks? And is that, how should be the government's priority of the kind of preparedness activities?
Yeah, as I explained, Japan has invested structure measures over 1 century, over the first 1 century. It means when Japan was developing countries, not rich country, government or society invested in such structure measures. So even in countries with a limited financial capacity, they can develop, they can manage financial sources somehow. In case of Japan, they try to involve local governments. Local governments contribute some financial sources for constructing dikes or structure measures, and try to use some other local community community efforts also try to involve communities, such a sort of an in-kind contribution. So combining or arranging such a various sources of financing, this is a key. No need to give up, we don't have enough money, we cannot invest in structures. Yeah. Each country should consider how they can manage financing for structure measures. There are some ways.
Yeah, I think that's the concept of investment can be very, very important, right? It's not really waste, but rather it's something, you know, it's good thing, you know, to put some money for that kind of issues, then because that can be, you know, we will get back for the future. So that's very, very important things, investing in India. So the final question to you, and it's very quickly, what will be the best technology in place for flooding so far in Japan, in addition to that infrastructure?
Yeah, tough question. Yes. Yeah, well, information and communication technology is crucial. How to share disaster information with government officers or government organizations or public or mass media. Yeah, such technology changed a lot. Before using such a ICT, yeah, we use telephone or landline telephone or such things. It's a very complicated and it's not so smooth. So information technology, sharing disaster information, this would be a big change, I believe.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Ishiwatari, for your presentation and also answering the questions, which was quite tough. But your presentation was very, very valuable for us. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so this is all for today's session. I would like to express sincere appreciation to all the speakers today and also the audience who sent us a lot of questions. But I have to apologize, we could not take all the questions and the answers, but we hope and we can take some questions later on and send to the suitable speakers. And this webinar was organized by the APRU Multi-Hazards Program and APRU-IRIDeS Tohoku University. As I mentioned at the beginning, this summer school comprises 3 separate sessions. So we have one more on the 29th. And if you have not registered yourself with the next session, which is the last one, and please do so after this session. And the topic of the next week's session is latest research in disaster science. And we have invited speakers from UC Davis and the University of the Philippines and United Nations University in Tokyo. And please be informed that the recording and slides will be shared by email and also on the website, APRU website, aprus+.org. And lastly, but not least, I'd like to thank the APRU Secretariat and the staff who operate this session very smoothly from Hong Kong, and for their strong support and cooperation to the multi-hazard program and its event. So I hope to see you the next summer school session on the 29th. And once again, thank you so much for your participation and see you next week.